Hello, and welcome to the Mr. 50mm YouTube channel. We're back to reviewing cameras. Wow. Anyways, some of you may know that at some point in the past, I bought a Canon 5DS-R. I came across this one locally, and it was a pretty good price, 800 Canadian dollar dues, plus shipping. So I went for it. And since I got it, I've kind of been shooting with it a lot. So, we're going to have a pretty well stacked sample gallery. On a random aside, since I got my GFX 50S, I've kind of trailed away from buying native glass for the GFX system. It always struck me as a bit too expensive, even for a medium format system, and it was too expensive for a system that I didn't know if I was going to stick to for a long time. Don't get me wrong, I love my GFX 50S, but I'm still on the fence on whether or not it's going to be my medium format system of choice. Anyways, the result is that instead of buying first-party glass, I was keen to buy EF glass and use it on the GFX instead. And the glass that I wanted to buy, or the glass that I have bought, is all the stuff and all the lenses that I wanted for my 5D Mark II all those years ago. As a result, my Canon glass collection has become well-rounded again. And by the time I got my 5DS-R, the library of Canon glass was just waiting to hit a Canon body for once, instead of being on the GFX. With that in mind, let's get into it. What is the Canon 5DS-R? Well, the 5DS-R is a DSLR released in June of 2015. It features a 50.6 megapixel full-frame CMOS sensor, and fun fact, it is still the highest resolution Canon sensor produced by Canon at the time of this recording, which is August 2025. Moving on, the ISO range of the camera is between 100 and 6400 or 50 to 12,800 with the expansion on. The AF system is a 61-point system with 41 cross-type points and 50 dual cross-type points. The 5DS-R can shoot at 5 FPS, and its shutter speeds are good from 30 seconds up to 1/8000th of a second. Flash sync is 1/200th of a second, and metering is handled by a 150K pixel sensor. Being a pretty modern camera, the 5DS-R has sensor cleaning, obviously, although no IBIS. Canon was late to the party on that one. The 5DS-R does in fact do video. Got a record button right there. And it goes up to 1080p. For storage, the 5DS-R takes a compact flash card and an SD card slot, UHS-1 compatible. The 5DS series is powered by the venerable LPE6 battery, and that's good for 700 SEPA rated shots. With the battery in it, this camera weighs in at 930 grams, roughly 0.93 plena, so close. When the 5DS-R was new, this camera came in at $3,899 dues, all the way back in the Stone Age that was 2015. That is about $5,277 dues 10 whole years later, or about $7,365 also 10 years later, but in Canada. What is special about the 5DS-R? Well, When this camera was released in 2015, it was the most pixel-dense full-frame camera to be had, and it held that title for quite a while, until July of 2019, with the introduction of the Sony A7R II and its 61 megapixel sensor. In fact, in the world of Canon full-frame cameras, the 5DS and the 5DSR are still yet to be surpassed when it comes to pure resolution. That said, we'll find out later that there is already, there's a little more to an image than pure resolution. That said, the 5DS series does again retain the title as the highest resolution DSLR to ever be made. For now, I'm looking at you, Pentax. When are you going to drop that 61 megapixel sensor in the K1? Additionally, the Canon 5DSR is the only Canon camera to offer the option to equip it with a optical low-pass filter canceller, which effectively negates the effect of the AA filter that's on the sensor. For those of you who don't remember, the D800 series offered this as well with the D800E, which was effectively the D800 with the canceller on top of the AA filter, like on the 5DSR. Shooting with the 5DSR, operation and feel. This is a DSLR, and it has a lot going for it. It's built off of the 5D3 body, an evolution of the 5D2, and if you've seen my 5D2 review, this aspect is broadly the same. It's got a great grip with good depth, and it feels excellent in the hands. Build quality and the weight of it are reassuringly good, with the heavy lens to balance out this camera. This is not a heavy lens, by the way. Being a 5D series camera, it features a top display that you can see here, and it is illuminated with amber, not gorgeously blue. And I do want to reiterate, like in most of my other reviews, I do really like having this top display, mainly to glance down and see where my exposure comp is at. It's one of the things I look at frequently before I take a shot. And again, illumination, not blue. Super sad. When it comes to the controls of the 5DSR, it's what you'd expect with Canon's design language. You got the dual command dial layout with one behind the shutter and the chunky one up in the back. And of course you have a big old AF joystick. Very excellent. And it actually comes in handy now since the 5D3 and the 5DS series got a massive boost in AF points courtesy of the 1DX. Now, on the back of the camera, you will notice that there is a live view / video toggle. This is new if you're coming from the 5D2, but I think it's a pretty perfect placement for these controls, as I can pretty reasonably thumb the mode for the control and activate when required with my thumb over here. And it has enough of a clickety-click that you're always going to know what you're knocking it into, what position you're going to knock it into, and it is a hard enough movement that you're not going to accidentally hit it. Additionally, since it is fairly well situated for your thumb, you're not going to impart too much force pressing up against it to start the video recording. So, good stuff overall. One thing that I'm not a particularly big fan of when it comes to Canon cameras beyond the 5D Mark II is the way the power switch got integrated into the mode dial, as you can see here. hopefully. Yes. Let me explain why. With the classic positioning where it was around this area right there, I consider that basically perfect, since all the critical camera controls could be accessible by just my right hand. But now, with the toggle up this way, I actually need to use my left hand to flip it on or turn it off. It's not a massive deal since DSLRs tend to sip power and I'm more than happy to generally leave it on anyways. But with the older cameras, I was kind of pretty accustomed to just flipping it off when required and then flipping it back on to shoot, since DSLRs are almost always instant power up. Now, when it comes to other controls on the left of the camera, they are exactly what you expect from Canon. You got all your main controls that are not directly related to, all the right-handed direct camera actions, but more things to do in the menus. And critically, there's no more direct print button. So that kind of makes it an excellent design. One thing that took me a little bit of getting used to was the newer way of magnifying images. With all the time that I spent with the 5D2, it really got entrenched that I press this to punch in. And honestly, the new way of tapping the magnify button and using the command dial to control your punch-inness, I admit, is faster and better. I need to just undo the muscle memory in my mind brain. Just a quick thing though about the menus. I think that it's about in this generation of Canon cameras that you got more introduced to the more advanced AF features that were present in the 1D series. And because of that, I think the menus on these cameras have started to get a little too deep. I mean, if you have a look, the AF tab is actually 5 subpages, which is kind of a lot of subpages. Now, overall, it's still well laid out and there's still a lot of reasonably good Canon sensibility in there, but it's about in this generation of camera where I do start to notice some menu creep. Gone are the days of the Canon 5D Classic. Now let's get into some very specific 5DS series things. You may have guessed this camera is quite pixel dense. As a result, there's a little more effort than in other Canon cameras to dampen the shutter / mirror slappies. On top of the mechanical things that they've done to the shutter and mirror, there's actually a delay that you can enable that will trigger when you press the shutter. What basically happens is that if you enable this delay, then the mirror will lift first and wait the delay duration before the shutter actually actuate. Basically, it's a mirror lockup. And it is actually under mirror lockup where you find that option in menu. Oh boy, the camera has gone to sleep. There we go. And you can see that for me, I have it set to 1/8 of a second. And this is again used to reduce the amount of movie things before the shutter is taken, before the shot is taken. And the shutter is, shuttered. Just to demonstrate this, I'm just going to set it, or have it now set to 1 second delay, and we're going to press the button and you're going to see the mirror go up. We're going to wait 1 second, then the shutter is going to actually fire. And in 3, 2, 1. Look at that. The final point I want to bring up about the 5DSR is image review. It feels a little bit slower than pulling up images from like a 5D4 or the regular 5D3, And I do imagine this has to do with rendering big old 50 megapixel RAW files that I like to shoot. And, doing this on a hardware that is effectively 10 years old at this point. It's not to say that it's slow, but it feels like a DSLR from yesteryear rather than a DSLR from yesteryear. I initially didn't notice this until I was shooting with the 5D4 and I switched back to the 5DSR. Let's have a quick look to demonstrate. Press the button, punch it. Takes just a fraction of a second longer than I'm used to. Didn't want to bring it up, but I did actually notice it, so here we are. Overall though, the 5DSR still feels great. Controls are very familiar to any Canon user, and for all the little niggles that there are, it is canceled out by the fact that the direct print button is dead. So, yay. Shooting with the 5DSR, image quality and autofocus. Some of you may remember from earlier in the video that I mentioned that this is the most pixel dense full frame sensor that Canon has ever made, and it remains the most pixel dense full frame sensor ever put into a DSLR body. Now, just a reminder, this was made in 2015, and if you don't remember those times, they were turbulent for Canon. While this sensor has a big pixel count, the sensor itself was criticized for poor performance in other areas like dynamic range or noise performance. And it wasn't just a criticism levied at the 5DS series. This kind of came up across a bunch of the Canon lineup. It just kind of seemed that for a while, Canon was stuck on their sensor design, especially when you compare them to Sony, who kept leapfrogging in various areas of sensor design, making new cameras that wowed people every generation. This can be seen when you compare the Canon 5DS series against something like the Sony A7R II. Say what you will about Sony ergonomics, about Sony coloring science, about Sony autofocus technology of the 2015 era. The A7R II demonstrated that for just a few less pixels than the 5DS series, you can have greatly improved dynamic range and otherworldly low light performance. Now, again, it's not to say the 5DSR is bad, but if anything, it kind of just feels like there are remnants of Canon's lethargicness and its slightly uninspired days when you look at the 5DS series. However, for me, the 50 megapixel sensor itself was a sign that Canon was starting to wake up. The 5DSR is sometimes considered best for the studio or for controlled lighting. And the reason for that was, I believe, due to the fact that there was relatively little wiggle room when it came to pushing and pulling files. Again, if you look up reviews of the 5DS or the 5DSR, and you see them compare it against the A7R II, you tend to get a lot of talk about how the A7R II allows you to do so much more pushing and pulling. Its files just are so much more malleable than the 5DSR files. And a lot of, again, the argument to be made is that for just, again, a few less pixels, you have a lot more wiggle room. But ultimately, what does it mean? The 5DSR is a camera where effectively you can't just say fix it in post. If you mess up the exposure enough, you won't be able to pull it back. You won't be able to push shadows up. You'll be met with blown out whites and a lot of noise. That said, when you expose it well, the images that come out of this are amazing. Now let's have a look at some noise samples. For me, things don't get too hairy until around ISO 3200 or above. Past that point, you're going to get things like details being smeared, your colors that are going to splotchify, and while you can reel things back in with noise reduction, you may have some, again, loss of detail, and it's a bit hard to ignore. That said, you also have to remember that this is 50 megapixels. So if you do scale the image down, things do also get better. Now, when it comes to autofocus, this is where the 5DS is no slouch. The AF system is very, very good. As with most DSLRs though, it doesn't have auto subject butt scratch detection or lower lip bite tracking. But what it does have is the system from the 1DX, and that is, again, 61 points, 41 cross, and 5 double cross. It's very, very snappy, and it's excellent for stills, and it does a pretty good job in low light. Again, it doesn't track like a modern mirrorless camera, but once you get to know the system, you can do some excellent things with it, and tracking action is not a problem. And I think that if you're particularly good at keeping your subject in frame and on your focus point, tracking is something the 5DSR can do a pretty good job of doing. That said, the 5DSR is a big megapixel shooter, and it'll only give you 5 frames per second for about 14 RAWs with a quick enough card. Let's have a listen. Sounds pretty good. Although, again, most of the times when I'm shooting it, I don't hear the flappities like that, since I almost always have that pre-delay put on to pop the mirror up, wait, and then have the shutter go. Being a modern DSLR, the 5DSR can shoot video 1080p. That's it though. The video does look solid for what it is, but it's certainly not as good as most modern cameras. You certainly don't have 4K in there. This is not helped by the fact that this camera is very not video centric. You don't really get any video tools, no zebras, no peaking. And the autofocus in the video mode is contrast only, so it isn't particularly good. Additionally, because this is before Canon thought that in-body stabilization was a cool thing, this only has stabilization if your lens has it. With that being said, let's have a look at some video samples. Okay, so for this one, I am going to be doing an autofocus test. We're also going to use the camera's internal microphone, and what we're going to do is see if it can track my face. I'm currently out of frame, and I'm going to step into frame. Hopefully I'm pretty center. I go forward. Back. Alright, that should be enough. Since I'm just me, what I'm going to do is set the focus box in the center, turn off face tracking, and see if it'll get me that way. So I'm going to now step into frame. I'll stay still a bit, just so it can get me, and I'll look directly at it, give it the best case scenario. Now let's go forward. Recommendation and conclusion. We're going to kick this off with price. The 5DS and the 5DSR series cameras right now in 2025 on the eBays and used camera shoppies look to be going for around $700 to $1,150 USD, with the regular 5DS being a bit cheaper than the R variants. Right off the bat, that makes this camera a fairly cheap option for a high-resolution shooter. It's overall a fairly good bargain. I would argue the cheapest would be, though, the Sony A7R II, if you're only looking at purely prices. On average, those tend to be going for around $50 to $100 USD less than the 5DS series cameras. Otherwise, other big megapixel cameras tend to come at significant increases for dollars, like the Nikon D850 or the Sony A7R III or newer. Those tend to be several hundreds more. Now, if you're getting to the end of your limit with how long this video is getting, then I'll end it now and say, yes, I recommend this camera. Feel free to click away, even if you already stuck to this video for this long. Otherwise, I will discuss why I'm going to recommend this series of camera just coming up right now. The 5DS and the 5DSR are an excellent contender for budget high-res cameras, despite the shortfalls of the Canon sensor. There are many things to love about this camera. And it's not just the relatively low cost. The 5DS series also brings other things to the table. Native EF glass support. Sure, it's not RF glass, but there are some real bangers out there, like the 40mm pancake right on here. Additionally, the EF lineup is now fairly cheap and crazy prolific, so you won't have a difficulty finding lenses that you might want to put on these things. You might already have some that you want to put on this camera. Additionally, with the fact that the EF mount is quite a short flange distance, you can adapt a pretty significant library of manual glass to the DSLR. And since it is a DSLR, weight and balance of the manual glass does feel better than on mirrorless cameras, even if the overall number of lenses you can adapt is less than most modern mirrorless systems. The system as a whole is also very well refined. Using the 5DS body feels well thought out and natural. Not a quantifiable thing, but it's something that I personally appreciate, specifically when you compare it to the A7R II. I don't have the R2, but I have recently bought the A7 II, which uses the same layout. Don't get me wrong, it's a good feeling camera from Sony, but where I don't feel like it's as good as the 5DSR is that when you just pick up the A7R or pick up the A7 II, things feel like you still need to customize them to get them to the way that you may want to shoot them. With the 5DSR, I spent a considerably less amount of time trying to customize things. Things were already ready to go mostly when I got the camera. Now, I will say though that after the A7 II, when it comes to the A7 III, Sony refined the controls a bit more and things are more out the box ready for newer Sony cameras. Again, like the A7 III or 4. For the 3, that's when I think physical controls had more refinement / an AF joystick was added. And for the 4, the menu system on the A7 series was overhauled to their newer, more modern style, which just was more natural to use. If you're a weirdo like me, you might also appreciate an optical viewfinder, and that's another reason to have the 5DSR or 5DS compared to a modern mirrorless high-res camera. Where the 5DS and the R become less competitive if you compare it to the A7R II, I think would be if you wanted maximum lens versatility. At this point, the E-mount system is stacked with a crazy number of first-party and third-party options. Toss in the fact that you have insane adapters out there that can autofocus manual glass or convert EF glass to autofocus on A7 cameras, then you have literally the world's lens category at your disposal. Another point is that if the 5DS series cameras are too heavy for you, then yeah, you might want to steer yourself towards a mirrorless camera. Considering that the 5DS on its own weighs more than the A7R II with a lens on it. Another thing to consider is the 5DS series does not have IBIS, where the A7R II does. And since the A7R II doesn't have a mirror, there are less things to move and cause shutter shake. Or, sorry, to cause camera shake, not shutter shake. You're going to get that anyways if you have a shutter moving. But, again, because the A7R II doesn't have a mirror, you don't have that slapping up to contribute shakeage to the camera. So that's something else to consider for high-res photos. Alright, this was a long video, I know. Before we go though, I want to know, who else is interested in big resolution cameras? Did you ever consider the 5DS series, or did you think it came with too many compromises? At any rate, I now have quite a few high-res cameras. And I do actually enjoy the flexibility that comes with shooting many, many pixels, but it's not always something that I gravitate to. Anyways, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Maybe a super thanks if you're into that. Till next time, bye.